Hey, g'day guys. This is sort of not something that I'm super familiar with, but I thought I'd explain it, or do my best to explain it. Like when I go out camping, I like to sort of have a fridge and lights and all that sort of stuff working, which, you know, this day and age, not hard to do. So just show you what the stuff I take out and how it all sort of fits together. But I really wanted to just explain a couple of basic things. So we all know from our, school days that volts equals IR, or current multiplied by resistance. So if you can do multiplication, you can do this sort of stuff. And then the stuff that we'll be talking to, which is what I want to try and break it down to, is power. Now power is watts, and power is a combination of two vectors. It's a combination of both your volts and your amps. And I love vectors. I love this sort of stuff. So that's why I really enjoy it. And if you put your V into here, you get a formula that's IR, which is volts, multiplied by I. So you can say power is a square root of current multiplied by your resistance. And so it's pretty straightforward then. But what happens is everything's measured in different stuff. Right, so our simple thing here, a solar panel. Well, sometimes they say it's generating 17 volts. Some people say they're 200 watt. Well, I'll show you mine today, and it's 100 watts, but it doesn't produce 100 watts. So you've got to sort of allow for these things. And then the next thing we'll talk about is a charge controller. Now I've just got a little basic charge controller, but you really need one of these because 17 volts, even though you could go straight off it, probably just a fraction high, I always work on 10 volts is what everything works on. Everyone says 12, but 10's a lot easier to calculate. So I work on 10, but 17's nearly 20, so it's nearly double, right? So you don't really want to go directly from your solar panel to any of your devices. So you've got to put a controller in place. And you can't put 17 volts into your battery. You sort of can, because as you know, you've got to have a higher voltage to get movement of electrons. So this has 17, and if my battery's 12, obviously it'll flow. But we don't want to flow 17 into here. We want to flow at about 14. And so I always think of it as a bit of a seesaw. There's a lot of analogies done about electricity, like volts, pressure, and amps is the flow of the water and the amount of the water, that type of stuff. But I'm a bit more simpler and basic than that. It's a seesaw. Whichever is the higher voltage, that's the way the flow of electrons is going to be. So 17 into a controller. Then we'll talk about a battery. Now this is a battery called a AGM type batteries, all sorts of batteries. Those guys that have got plenty of money, they buy the U-Butte flash ones. This one here, even though it's 120 amps, you really don't cycle it down to zero. You cycle it maximum halfway. Batteries prefer, these type of batteries prefer to stay charged. So use them, charge them, use them, charge them. If you run them right down, you shorten their life. They say these batteries have got 1,000 cycles. That means you can drop the voltage out of it, charge it. Drop the voltage, charge it about 1,000 times, once a day. 365 days in the year, you do the maths, they last about 3 years, right? So, but other batteries that are more expensive can cycle many more times. In fact, some of them, they don't even know how long their life can be because they've run them in and out so many times. So, and they're still going. So anyway, that's your battery. And then you've got a thing called an inverter. Now we won't do much about the inverter today, but this is just a cheapo again, and it's a 300 watt inverter. So the most I can get out of this at 240 volts is 300 watts. So you can't run too much on it, but we'll have a bit of a crack at it. So what we first got to do is hook our solar panel up with our controller. Now, for me to get out in the sun there and run a bit of a cable back here so I'm not lifting everything, we're just going to connect these up. Now, always match your size of your lug with your terminal. The easiest way to do it is just see if it fits. Yep, good go. So I'm going to use this type. And that's pretty straightforward. I'll zoom in and give you a shot of these. So there you go, terminals are done. A little bit better than just leaving a wire on the end, putting some lugs, and don't forget to heat shrink them and label them up, so you're positive and you're negative. So we'll go out now, put the solar panel out, we'll come back, measure the voltage on the battery to start with, and then we'll measure it once the solar panel's given some power in. Here we go, a little bit of sun coming out now. See if you can read the volts. So this is the controller. One side, this is from the panel, so that's your source. This is your battery. And this says lights or another 12 volt output. So we'll just measure this now that the sun's out a little bit. So that's about up to spec now. So sun's coming out, producing 17.8 volts. Okay, so then it goes through the converter and comes out to where we're going to the battery. Righto, so we got 14.3 here. I know, that's just bad connections there, guys. So here, we're up here at the battery. We know we had about 14.3 down there at the solar panel. And up here I've got 14 exactly. I'll see if I can read you that. Now that we know a couple of things, we can write it up on our board and try and do some calculations and work out, whether we're going to have enough power to charge up our fridge or charge up the battery that's going to power the fridge. So we know down there we had 17 volts. So that's our figure there, 17 volts. It's 100 watts. We know as it came out, it went into here at 17, but it came out, if you remember, at 14. Or actually 14.3. It's a nice 3. But the length of that cable coming up to here gave us only 14. Now that's pretty good. You only need about, well, just more than 12 to charge it. 13.2, 13.4 is sort of what you want to load up. It doesn't really matter if it's 14 or even 15, but probably not much more than that. So 14 volts into your battery, really good charging. Now what does that really mean? 14 volts, 100 watts. We're going to convert everything into watts, into power. into watts power, and then we can just work off that. Now, it's not as simple as just doing the conversion, because some things are over time and other things aren't. But we'll try to make it as simple as possible. The battery was fully charged anyway, and it's a 120 amp hour battery, so we can write that in as well. Now, this is where it becomes a little bit, what would you say, orange and apples, because in one sense we want to talk about watts, and that's power. And another thing, they're talking amp hours, and that's current, amps, current. So why do they do that? Well, it's all about what we talked about before. Power equals VI, the volts times the current. And so if we show power, it's not giving us a real good indication, because there's two variables here. The battery sometimes can be 14, sometimes can be 12. When it's flat, 11, 11.2, 10.5, totally flat. Can it give you any more battery power then? No. So what we say is a battery has amp hours, but we'll convert that as well. I like to think of it as a tank of water. And this battery here has 120 amp hours. It really has 120 amps, but they're not effective amps that you can use. Like I said before, you don't want to run your battery all the way down. What you want to do is run it only to about halfway. So you really only want to use about 60 amps out of that. And so that's what we'll be working on. We'll base it only floating our battery to half usage, and then we'll work out the other parts of our equation. But like I said before, I like to think of the equation pretty straightforward. Two sides, the input and the output. So we've discovered a little bit of our chain here. Call this a bit of a block diagram. Our solar panel into our controller, loading up our battery, and then our inverter. We'll hook it on and try to make it work in a minute. But really, what you want to start thinking about now is just simply what you've got in your battery and what you've potentially got in your generation or your source, and simply try to work out your output. Now, I've travelled up to the top of Australia and round the tip and all that sort of stuff, and I've had a fridge going the whole time. It's fantastic not to take ice. And so the fridge I'm going to show you, so like I said, I like to look at it pretty well straightforward or fairly simplistic. So let's think about our battery in watts. So we say it's 120 amp hours, but what capacity is that in power or watts? Well, we know the voltage is 12, so that's fairly straightforward. And we say it's 120 amp hours, so if you used 120 amps in 1 hour, the battery would be dead. Or if you used 10 amps over 12 hours, the battery would be dead. So that's the capacity over hours, or in hours. But what we say is, effectively, you only use half of that. So we'll say we got a total of 60 amps. And 12 times 60, 612, 72. We've got 720 watts. So we write that down here. And we've got 100 watts of usage. So we think our battery will last, what, 7 hours? There we go. Now, we haven't got 7 hours in a day, we've got 24. So we work out our usage, 100. And that's running lights during the daytime, like what silly bugger would do that? And then we say, well, our solar panel's producing 100 watts, but probably ramps up 10 o'clock. So it's only producing 100, right in the middle of the day. Prior to that, whatever. So you pretty well got that covered, because you're ramping in a bit extra. So this time that you're using the power is battery power. So you can probably say here and here. So we got 6 hours and 6 hours, 12 hours. And what we say, we got 7. I've connected up the inverter, and obviously red to red, black to negative. With these inverters, you've got to have power to them before you turn them on. Now this will give it the test. This is an 800 watt grinder. This is a 300 watt inverter, so it shouldn't even work. Okay, so just to explain the principles of what you can get out of something when it can't deliver, I haven't even tried this. I'm going to turn it on and see what happens. Oh, might blow up. As we sort of expected, I get some movement out of it. Yeah, far too much power, too much draw on it. I don't want to blow the fuse. They're internal, so, oh hang on. This one's an external fuse. And, but anyway, 300 watts is going to charge up the fridge at 80 watts and run some lights. Or I can even just come off the 12 volt. So it's a great setup when you're going camping. So guys, just a little bit of an outtake. Someone said to me I sounded a bit like my dad. Well, I think that was my cousin Catherine. Anyway, I've got one of his tools. This is his old pop riveter. And shit, he used to love pop riveting. Like he would rivet anything. If you're standing still, you'd probably get riveted. Anyway, I've got this broken old table here. I'll just put a rivet in it, see how I go. How's that? All fixed.